Do you want to be the CEO of your civil engineering firm, or at least a high-level leader? Well, how can you leverage your technical expertise to do just that? Also, how about firm values? How can you actually utilize the values of your firm to make real decisions? In this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I'm thrilled to have with me Doug Shatto. Doug is the president and CEO of Lochmueller Group, and we're going to dive into all of these things and more. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest on to the show for today. Doug Shatto is the president and chief executive officer at Lochmueller Group. Doug, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm happy to be here.
No, we're happy to have you here. I've had the chance to kind of work a little bit with Doug and his firm, and it's a great firm. They're doing a lot of great things. They're growing fast, and so we wanted to kind of have a conversation with Doug around some of the challenges and the exciting aspects of that. And Doug, you've been the CEO of Lochmueller Group now for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of share some of the key moments in your career as a civil engineer that have kind of helped you to shape your leadership style at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I might have a strange track for people that end up in this position because I've actually only been with two firms in my career. I spent the first 25 years of my career with a smaller firm in St. Louis. It was very specialized. We only practiced traffic engineering and maybe a few appendages off of that. So, I mean, we were in a bit of a niche service. When I first joined that firm, I think I was the eighth person in the door. They'd been around for 10 or 15 years prior to that point in time. But they brought me in because one of the two principals that was still there was trying to plan his retirement, 5-10 years out from that point in time. So I developed a strong relationship with him, and that would have been my first mentor. And so that was a key for me, really being able to glean what I could from him. They probably thrust me into some leadership roles pretty quickly in my career, which certainly got me on a faster track, I think. And when he retired, it was me and the other surviving principal at that point in time. But we really had different value systems, I think, between the two of us. I ended up staying with that firm for 25 years before I ultimately moved over and joined Lochmueller Group. And I think the other big moment in my career as far as just preparing me for this role, it's not so much a moment as it was the relationship I developed with my predecessor. And he's actually was a former banker that was in the role of CEO for Lochmueller Group. He'd been brought in by the founder of our company because we really needed to have that financial acumen that we were lacking before. And I was able to glean an awful lot from him. Coming from a civil engineering background, I really didn't have that strong financial backing that he did. So I really tried to pay close attention to the things that he was doing from a financial and management perspective, and that really helped me prepare for, I think, the eventual role that I ascended to.
That's great. I totally hear you that mentoring is such a critical aspect of our careers in this industry. And you mentioned that, your predecessor was a banker, and obviously you're a civil engineer by background, by schooling. You practiced in the transportation industry for a while. Talk a little bit about that, because a lot of our listeners are civil engineers, but they also have aspirations of leadership. So when was it like kind of in your career where you kind of said, hey, I like civil engineering, but I think I can, lead people or, manage projects, lead people effectively, get into that side of the industry? Was it something early in your career? How did you go down that path?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, most civil engineering curriculums, you've got the choice to choose between 6 or 7 different disciplines, depending upon, really what your area of emphasis is and what you think your strengths are. And I had considered 3 or 4 different ones. I ultimately chose traffic because it spoke to me. I was comfortable with it. And one of the unique things about traffic engineering, at least in the role that I had, and again, we were a small consulting firm. We did both public and private work, and we worked an awful lot with the development community. And that necessitated a lot of communication. And I think that communication probably was the strongest aspect of me developing leadership skills there, because we had to do a lot of public speaking. We had to have direct conversations with our clients and with the agencies that we were dealing with. We had to do a lot of written communications, and those are all things that probably my forte. I mean, I did probably have an emphasis on, technical writing skills when I was in college, and that really helped helped me in that role that I had initially when I came out of school. And that communication also translated, I think, to the leadership roles that I had. When my previous firm, I eventually became president of that. I was president there for about 7 years before I moved over to Lockmueller. And so I was dealing with that leadership role for quite some time before making the switch in companies. But I'm constantly preaching to our team here now that it's really about communication on a daily basis. I mean, communication with each other, with our peers, with our subordinates, with our clients, with our agencies, whether it's written or verbal or digital. Communication to me is the core of leadership, because you really have to try and be clear, to some extent concise. I'm somewhat notorious for long emails, so I'm not always concise, but I think that is really a key attribute that I've been able to capitalize off of, and it's helped put me into those positions where I've been able to take those next steps, because you have to be able to communicate, and obviously that's a two-way street. You have to be able to understand the people that you're dealing with. You have to understand the subject matter clearly, and then being able to convey that to others. And I think that for my purposes or my experience, that was really a key path.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point in that, yes, communication is definitely critical when it comes to leadership. And I feel like it's also super critical in civil engineering, right? Because of all the parties we deal with the public, we deal with, agencies and leaders, et cetera. So I feel like when you put leadership and civil engineering together, it even more amplifies the importance of communication because of all of these different parties. And you said something there, Doug, that I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about in terms of like understanding the subject matter. I know that in our industry, we have leaders with all different backgrounds. Someone might be a banker in finance. You happen to be a civil engineer by background. Do you feel that that's really helpful for you when you're dealing with your team members or other stakeholders, because you're at the highest level as a CEO, but you also understand what those that just graduated and joined your firm are actually doing? Do you find that that's really helpful in your communication efforts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and you have to also recognize civil engineering, I think, is very people oriented. And so I think that is a common bond that we have, whether they're entry-level people that we have or grizzled veterans within the company. I think understanding what they're going through, what they're having to deal with, what their anxieties might be, I think that's really important, at least from my perspective, because I think that I can empathize with some of those experiences and then try and be able to lead them in ways that they can better deal with that. Now, I'm not obviously dealing with each one of our people one-on-one, and particularly since we've grown so much. But I do think that when we talk about our team as a whole, being able to understand the challenges that they have and their day-to-day functions and what's going to drive their anxiety levels up, or what's going to allow them to succeed and what they're going to be looking for. Obviously, you have some people that are very focused on the technical side, and they only want to think about the work they have in front of them, and they're not really interested in the communication with their peers or with their clients and things of that nature. That's fine. There's definitely a very important place for those people in every organization. But then there's also the people that really maybe see the other side of the coin, if you will, where you have to deliver the product, but delivering it doesn't necessarily mean what's just on the plan set. It also means being able to convey the content of that and being able to work through some of the challenges that will pop up in every job. And so those are things I think I can relate to based upon my prior experience. When I was still doing engineering, which I'm not anymore, but traffic engineering, and particularly the field that we were in, we kind of joked with some of my peers that we didn't feel like we were necessarily doing engineering every day. There was certainly a lot of calculation. There was a lot of engineering judgment that was exercised, but a lot of what we did really involved negotiation or trying to find common ground with the agencies that we were representing or working with, and trying to make sure everybody understood what we were trying to achieve and get that consensus really on what the final solution was going to be.
Yeah, that's great. And I also think that someone's receptiveness to your message can be different if they know that you've been in their shoes before.
Yeah.
I mean, we do a lot of learning and development and training programs at EMI, and pretty much all of our instructors are engineers that have worked in the engineering world. And I think that is very helpful when we deliver the content to the program participants, because they know that we've managed projects before in the industry. Right. So they can kind of make that connection with you. So I definitely think there's a benefit. And I think there's certainly a benefit to having people that have different disciplines and backgrounds, finance, banking, in your firm at some leadership level. But I also think having some leadership that, comes from that civil engineering background, is very beneficial in terms of communication. So that's good to hear. So before we go further here, Doug, let's learn a little bit more about Lochmueller Group. Tell us about like where you're located, the type of services that you offer, about how big you are right now.
Yeah. Well, we're headquartered in Evansville, Indiana, and we're here because this is where we were founded. The executive director of the municipal planning organization in Evansville, Keith Lochmueller, was the one that founded the company. And so we've grown here in southern Indiana, and ultimately we've covered every corner of the state. But in the last 5 to 10 years, we've really focused on trying to grow beyond just Indiana. So we've got Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky is where we currently have physical locations. We have done work and we have people in other states as well. We're up to about 350 people and still growing right now. And we have, we're trying to get our 14th office open. We got a number of people up in Northwest Indiana, not too far from Chicago, that are working remotely right now. And we're trying to get to final negotiations on that 14th office. And in the meantime, I'm looking at other adjacent states as well. We're very aggressive with our growth plans right now. We see an awful lot of opportunity in our industry and with the team that we built here. So we're really focused on that. Our primary emphasis is infrastructure engineering. So highways, roadways, water resources. We do a lot of environmental work. We provide construction engineering and inspection. We have a traffic engineering group, as I was alluding to. That was one of the ones that I have my fingerprints on. And then some other services, survey and right-of-way acquisition and right-of-way services. So we've tried to diversify, although strategically we're still trying to add to that suite of services. We want to diversify further and maybe grow our footprint further.
That's great. That's great. And yeah, and Lockmueller has a nice office out there, the headquarters. I had the chance to visit with Doug this past fall there, and it's a beautiful place. And Doug, you are on the path of growth and evolution, no doubt, as you mentioned. And, as the CEO, you've been the CEO now for a couple of years. How do you approach, taking some of the strategic initiatives that were maybe in place when you started as the CEO and to bring them along, and then also think about like new initiatives or where you need to change and evolve? Like, how does that process look for you? Because I would imagine, you have intake from a lot of people there, and you kind of have to help to shift that plan.
Yeah. One of the strategies that I probably inherited, and this is, we had myself and others as part of the senior management team that participate in our strategic planning. And it was actually more than 10 years ago, I think, when we first identified one initiative was we wanted to try and diversify and get into other sectors. We identified the energy sector as something that we wanted to get into. We weren't quite sure how we would do it. We have made some progress, but we have a long way to go. So we do have some energy clients, but we're still providing some of our traditional civil engineering services to them, and maybe not energy-specific services. So that's something that we're still trying to develop, bringing in some additional talent and different skill sets. So last year, we hired our first electrical engineering person, and we're starting to build a team around him now that we think will open a few more doors for us. So that's one thing that we're trying to do to try and, broaden our client base. And lately I've expanded that from just energy to maybe also industrial clients as well, that we're trying to find, more of a private sector. The vast majority of our clients are in the public sector. And I'd like to have a little better balance there, because obviously the markets fluctuate and they tend to offset one another. And I want to have the ability to survive some of the cycles that we will inevitably go through. So diversifying with energy sector and industrial sector are one way that we're going about that. We're doing some basic infill, trying to, really populate the rest of our existing market. Beyond that, probably our most recent initiative that has come up since I've been in this seat is really looking at potential expansions geographically. And that would probably coincide with additional diversification. And specifically, we are looking into an acquisition mode now, where we might purchase additional companies outside of our footprint, or perhaps companies that do something different than we already do. And so we are now looking probably in 4 or 5 different states. We're doing some scouting to try and identify prospective targets. And in fact, we are going to be talking to some people down in Texas in the next few weeks just to see if there's something there that we would want to act upon. the strategy there is that, our business, particularly on the civil side, I think, and the infrastructure side, it's very cyclical. And it's obviously tied to funding, whether it's federal funding or state funding. And programs will go through their cycles where, right now we're at a peak on both the federal side and the state side for most of the region that we work within. And so it's good times right now, but I know it's not going to last indefinitely, and some of that funding will start to expire and some of the opportunities will wane. In order to offset that strategically, we want to be in some different geography, knowing full well that there's some areas that have a lot of growth yet to occur, that some of the states may be lagging on their programs compared to the ones that we're currently in. So we are really focusing on trying to diversify that footprint, be in states so that as the cycles ebb and flow from one state to another, we'll have better balance with and be able to maybe export work and or resources from one state to another in order to maintain the staff that we have.
That's interesting. That's great. It's really interesting to hear you talk a little bit about just strategy in general. Like you have a strategy, then you kind of almost have to have like a team around it and a plan around it. Like, for example, to take action on the strategy, we're going to start building an electrical team, right? And like start thinking through the different steps. I guess, I'm thinking like an engineer, of course, but thinking about the different steps and processes that you would use to kind of drive that strategy, which is interesting. And what you said about the geographic diversity makes a lot of sense in terms of funding and things of that nature. And, I've seen with a lot of our clients that kind of get to a certain point, right? The next step of acquisitions kind of becomes like a logical next step to kind of grow and take the next step. And that kind of leads me into the next topic that I wanted to talk to you about, which I know is one that you're pretty passionate about, which is, the culture of the organization. And, how do you foster this culture of kind of collaboration and engagement now, especially, you have employee owners, which I think is one factor, but also when you're thinking of growing to that degree and acquiring, I think that probably is top of mind for you. And how do we maintain this culture?
Yeah. And it's paramount to us that our people really embrace our culture. I think that they put a high value on it and they don't want to threaten that in any way. So as we've grown, that's been a constant conversation that we've had in the last couple of years that when I joined the company, we were, I think, 135 people. And that was, 14 years ago. And now we're at 350 and really accelerating from there. And change is inevitable, but sometimes change makes people think that the culture is changing. And we've said that's not necessarily the case. For us, our culture is driven by a number of things. Foremost is our corporate values. We have an acronym that we developed a few years back as part of our strategic planning. It's CARDIA, and CARDIA represents our values. And you could try and go to the roots of the word, even if it's just an acronym, but CARDIA is from the heart. And it's an acronym that represents creativity, accountability, respect, dedication, integrity, and achievement. And we preach that pretty frequently. Every time I'm given any kind of speech or written or verbal to the staff, we usually make reference to those CARDIA values. But beyond that, I think that we really try and make sure that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And so we use that with our leadership teams. We use it to help guide some of our decision making. One particular situation I remember that really made a strong impact on me was that we were part of a team here in Evansville, our headquarters, that we do a lot of work with the city of Evansville. They had a major water resources project. We had already been doing work for them, and they had a major plant project that was being solicited, and they were looking for teams from all around the country. We formed a team of our own. We actually were a sub to a national firm that was bringing a little bit more to the table. And we thought we were probably going to be the team to beat. Well, it turns out that the city did something really unusual in this case where I think there was maybe some different influences in terms of the selection process, but they couldn't decide on any one team. So they decided, well, we're going to pick and choose from each team. We're going to take the best from each team and try and put them together. And that didn't sit well with us because we'd made a commitment to the partners that we had formed with. And we felt that commitment was consistent with our CARDIA values. And so we actually went to the city and said, we appreciate you including this in the selection, but we're going to have to turn it down because that's not consistent with the ethics that guide our decision making and the decisions that that we made to form a team with this other firm. They respected the decision, and we're still doing quite a bit of work with them, but it was tough. We were turning down hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work there potentially because we felt it was the right thing to do. And so really we always try and make decisions. We use those CARDIA values to say, we want to do the right thing. We want to make the right decisions. We want to be able to stand behind the decisions we make. So that really made a big impact on me. And I think it impacted our staff as well, that we have a lot of self-respect in terms of how we do business, and we want to continue to do it that way. In order to reinforce those values, though, we go beyond that. I mean, one of the facets of our culture is that we try not to be corporate. We try not to be very distant from one another, even though we've grown quite a bit in the last 5 years, and we almost have 14 offices. We really make an effort to engage people in all of our locations and really try and keep them in touch with each other and in touch with us in the leadership team as well. I regularly make visits to most all of our offices and try and sit down, not just with those local leaders, but also with the individual staff members. I make myself accessible to them in terms of wanting to hear how we can do things better, what we're doing wrong, what we might be doing right. Oftentimes I'll go out to lunch or dinner or maybe even a few cocktails with a small group of our staff just to hear what they had to say. And I want to keep open channels. We have open door policies in most of our offices, and we do that intentionally because we want people to feel like they have access to the leadership. They have an input into what we do, and that they can help guide us in terms of making us a better firm. And you mentioned the fact that we are employee owned. We're 100% ESOP, and that also plays into our culture because we want there to be an ownership values amongst everybody in our staff, that they do contribute to the bottom line, and they can have an impact on how we perform. And in turn, that benefits them because an ESOP is nothing more than an enhanced retirement plan. So as we increase the value of our firm, it increases the value of their retirement plans, and they can control some of their own destiny that way. So all those things combine to form our culture. And I think we do everything we can on a daily basis to try and reinforce that and make sure that we're not strained from what we think are those important values.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, I've heard you speak, Doug, to your team members a few times, and I do hear you reference the cardio, which I think is great. And I think having an acronym is such a great way to do it because it makes it easier for people to recall, and there can be some meaning behind the acronym. And I also think that the example that you gave in terms of with that contract you were going after and how you used the values to drive your decision is also a really good example, because a lot of times I see in firms that, the values are more for the wall or for the website, right? And they're not so much something that people actually act on, right, if you will, right? And use in their day-to-day action. So I love hearing examples like that. In fact, our values here at EMI, we keep it simple too. It's give, guide, grow. We give our all, we guide each other, we grow together. And we've had to move away from a few vendors just because they're not having that mindset, right? And they're not, taking on the same values. So I really like your example because it shows people that if you have values that are really true to you and your team adopts them, it makes it easier to make decisions together.
Yes.
Just like the contract that you walked away from because of that reason. So I think that that's great. So I think the civil engineering industry in general, Doug, has been a pretty good place to live for firms and people over the last several number of years with the infrastructure development, et cetera.
Yeah, it's hard not to succeed right now.
Yeah, it's been hard not to succeed. I mean, all the firms that we work with are, they can't hire enough people.
Right.
Through COVID, they were busy. In fact, some of them doing transportation work were busier because the roads were empty. So they were doing more work. So, it's been a good place to live. But I'm wondering, from your seat right now, what do you see as some of the challenges that are facing our industry that we don't always hear as much about because of how good things have been?
Well, obviously, I think you touched on the foremost one, which is just the talent shortage that we have. And that's, I was at a ACEC conference last fall, and they were projecting that talent shortage was only going to grow in the next 15 years to the extent we have half as many civil engineers or engineers in general as we might need. So that kind of leads to other challenges now that we've got, we have a hybrid work environment. That was one of the things that came out of COVID, and it's presented its share of challenges in terms of how do we make sure we get the same level of productivity? How do people stay engaged? How do they stay accountable? I think we've been pretty successful being able to manage that. I wouldn't say it's 100% across the board because that's kind of hard for some managers to get their hands around. It's just not what they're used to. So we're still working on that front. But I think the modern work environment has presented some new challenges for us. Another aspect of that is AI, which seems to be really popular in our industry now, but that really goes hand in hand with the talent shortage that we have. We're hoping, and when I've been talking about this with our team, that I really want us to be exploring AI and figure out how we might be able to incorporate that into our work, and then not just the busy work, the high, repetitive work that it would be most applicable to, but ultimately, I think we're going to be looking for solutions that how can it actually work into the engineering side of what we do. That's the scary part of it. Again, that conference I was at last fall, I heard from other CEOs that expressed the same concern that we want to have AI, we want to be able to use it, but how do you subtract the engineer from that equation and trust in an artificial intelligence? Well, the consensus in that group was we're not really subtracting the engineer. Even if you're using AI as a tool, we're going to need engineers to be able to develop the queries, the questions that AI is going to be responding to refine that, and then to be able to vet the answers that come out of that. So, and I've been kind of conveying that to our team, saying that, we do have a path here that we can use some of these tools. It's something that we're going to need to embrace as we go forward. We got a long way to go yet. I mean, we're just at the inception right now, but that I think is another challenge for us, is to try and figure out how we incorporate that into our work life and do it in a way that we're not jeopardizing the quality of the product or the safety of the public that we're ultimately serving.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. In fact, I do believe that AI is part of the solution for that shortage of talent, but I think that there has to be a well thought out solution that includes our existing engineering professionals and how they can better leverage AI so that if there's just less people doing more work, they can still get it done effectively, right? So I think there's an interest there, and I think it's something that the leading firms I see are trying to stay on top of it and educate themselves around it now so they can figure out how to put that solution together. And it's exciting, and, it's a little nerve-wracking and all at the same time. But I think it fits very well into what we do because, AI can help us serve our clients better as consulting firms, but we just have to figure out kind of how to control it, if you will, right? Because it's so powerful and we need to kind of wrap our head around it. So next thing I want to ask you about, Doug, is decision-making. In your seat, you're obviously tasked with making very, very important decisions for your organization on a very regular basis. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about how you approach the decision-making process. I'm sure it's a collaborative process. You're dealing with your fellow leaders. You mentioned already how tuned in you try to be with your staff all over your different offices and connecting with them. But just take me through, like, when you're faced with a decision, an important decision, how you think through it. What does that look like for you?
Boy, there's a lot of aspects of that. I mean, I think maybe first it's important to recognize our governance system. And this is something we just changed in the last 2.5 years since I've been in this seat, that we were going through. We've been in a state of constant evolution and transition because all of our founding members have retired, and we've had a lot of change in leadership in the last few years. And so we've had to adapt to some of those changes as we've gone along, but we've tried to make sure, to your point, that we've always stayed very highly collaborative. We ended up going with a dual board system. So we have a traditional board of directors. We call it our fiduciary board to separate it from what we have internally as a management board. Other firms might call it a management committee. They're probably the same thing. Our management board really deals with internal, operational, day-to-day issues. Our fiduciary board is more outward-looking, looking at the growth of the company, the health of the company, what we can do strategically, things of that nature. So I've got two boards that I'm working with. And then on top of that, the leadership team that we lean on pretty heavily. And that includes our C-suite, our executive team. And that's a group of 5 of us that we talk frequently, and obviously in varying levels at different times. But I mean, that group is very tight in terms of being able to bounce ideas off each other. Doesn't mean we all agree on everything at every time. Sure. In fact, I've encouraged our boards to have some disagreement. It's a healthy part of the process that we need to hear different opinions. So that's something that we've embraced both at the board level and even at the executive level when we're debating where to go with a particular decision. I I would say I almost always will seek input from one or more of those groups before I'd make a decision myself, because I really want to understand how is it impacting every aspect of our business. And then, there's some things we do that would seem like it's a no-brainer, but we need to think through that with all the different types of services that we offer and the people we have in different locations, that some of those decisions might have unintended consequences that we need to recognize. It may not change our decision, but we at least want to know if there's an impact down there that we'd have to mitigate at some point in time, or try and at least help our staff understand why we did something. And that goes back to the communication I talked about earlier. I think that's really important to the decision-making process, that I need the communication from my team in order to be able to make that decision. And then I want to be able to communicate back to our team or our entire staff why we are doing something. The understanding why is so important, I think, for our culture and for the success of our team, that there's much better buy-in if they know that there's a reason behind it. And it kind of goes to that engineering mindset, I think, that if they understand it, if we're transparent with the decisions that we've made, I think that they're going to be more receptive to it.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds to me, which makes a lot of sense, that the governance that you have is very helpful. It gives you like a process to go through for decision making, because decisions can be messy. There could be a lot of risks, a lot of benefits. And when you look at a decision, and having some kind of structure there, at least make sure that you're considering different factors, you're getting different opinions, and to your point, getting some healthy disagreements around it, which is a positive thing.
Yeah.
So
and that group is structured so that we definitely have representation from different geographies as well as different disciplines. So we're getting a pretty good cross section of who we are as a team, and making sure that everybody has a voice in that process.
That's great. All right, Doug, the last question I have for you here is, a lot of our listeners are, working civil engineering professionals, and they aspire to be leaders in the industry like yourself. What advice can you leave with them in terms of, developing their leadership skills so that they can be an impactful leader in this industry? What would you share with them?
We have summit meetings occasionally. Like, one of our disciplines will get together and we'll bring all our people together from different offices and get together. Last year, we had a summit meeting of our interns that we had last summer. And I went up to Indianapolis where they were meeting, and I spoke with them. And that actually was one of the questions that came up that day. So I'm just trying to think about how I answered that one. I'm going to lean back on some of the things I said already. Communication is certainly a key, that they really have to understand that if they want to ascend into leadership positions, you've got to be able to work with different groups of people. You've got to be able to work with different opinions. The only way you can do that is being able to understand where those other individuals are coming from, and then being able to communicate your own points to them as well. Another big factor, I think, that I communicated to the interns, is I said, you got to be willing to step up and accept some responsibilities. And sometimes that takes you outside of your comfort zone. There's a lot of people I know, a lot of engineers I know, including many that work for us, that they're very comfortable doing what they do on a daily basis, but they aren't comfortable if their role is changing or if they're asked to do something more than that. And you have to overcome that if you want to get into a leadership position, because you will inevitably have to do some things that aren't necessarily very tasteful, and maybe things that you didn't learn in college or that you haven't really had prior experience with. You're going to have to break some new ground as part of that process. So I think being ready and willing to take on new responsibilities and to embrace that. I mean, sometimes it means you got to, the adjective or the acronym that we use, not an acronym, the idea that we use is, you might have to go pick up a shovel somewhere and help somebody out. We do believe in servant leadership, meaning we need our leaders to be able to help out our team any way they can to make sure that we're successful in it. Doesn't mean that we're always going to be doing the work, but we at least have to be able to be ready to jump in there with our team and be able to tell them, this is how we need to do it. This is really what we need as an outcome, and literally try and lead them through that process.
That's great. No, I love that. And I think that adaptability is so important. And for those of you out there listening, the way that you can develop that, I believe, is to try different things in your career at the youngest of ages, right? So like, get involved in your local professional association, but volunteer to lead something, not just be a member, chair a committee, help out with a conference or event, because it's things that we're not used to doing as engineers. Right. So you need to constantly try new things so that when your supervisor comes to you and say, hey, can you call the client, or can you go to this board meeting? you're not like, whoa, I've never done that before. You've kind of got a little bit of experience of stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yeah,
so
those are good examples. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep.
yeah, it sounds like that's kind of the way to go. So once again, Doug Shatto. Doug is the CEO and president of Lochmueller Group, a company that's growing fast. They're doing awesome things. And Doug, I appreciate a couple of minutes from you here on the Civil Engineering CEO.
It's my pleasure, Anthony. It's good working with you, and we look forward to doing what we can going forward.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Doug. He is an exciting leader in the industry. He's doing some very innovative things. And really, you can see at the core of it, it's communication with everyone in his organization. If you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.